Canada's Challenge, Our Coastland, Borders Part 2, written and delivered by David Watts. Canada's longest border is the coastline that surrounds her on three sides, life-giving and awe-inspiring. Punctuated politically in the northwest by the state of Alaska and in the northeast by Hans Island in the shadow of Greenland, it is a continuity that delineates the north half of Turtle Island as a continent. Yet it is three coasts, based not only on the oceans facing it west, north, and east, but geological features of each's formation at a distinct stage of Earth's evolution, rock compressed, scoured, and split in ice ages. Our Pacific coast is almost continuously corrugated by ridges, grooves that multiply its length many-fold beyond the latitudinal length of the inside passage from the Salish Sea to Alaska. Contrast this with the regularity of the American Pacific coast beyond Juan de Fuca Strait. No Beach Boys or California dreaming culture here, but the somber silence of Emily Carr Village rainforest cathedrals. On finger fjords reaching inland, each with a freshwater input and its own tidewater ecology, self-governing First Nations could live autonomously even when at odds with the nation at the head of the next inlet. For competing Spanish and British naval explorers, this required a greater degree of collaboration than existed on more regular coastlines or on the high seas. With both powers farther from their European homelands, it led to a different contact culture than occurred on the Atlantic coast, where competing French and British interests created a heightened state of conflict, arming each other's Indigenous allies. This was notable in a personal friendship that emerged between Captain George Vancouver and Spain's Pacific commander Juan Francisco de la Bodega y Cuadra, despite British and Spanish interests on the coast that almost led to war between the two world powers not long before the two men met. Their friendship was sealed in Vancouver's proposal to name the big island that they just discovered was an island and not a headland at the entrance to a northwest passage, Vancouver and Quadra Island. This proposal was overturned later when Britain gained undisputed influence in the region and Quadra's name was relegated to a lesser island farther north in the Salish Sea. Vancouver's expedition meticulously mapped the coastline, entering each inlet with rowboats when the channel was too narrow for sailing ships, continuing inward until a freshwater stream or solid rock wall showed this was not the entrance to a passage. In one such inlet, in the summer of 1793, he narrowly missed the arrival of Alexander Mackenzie, who showed, writing on the rock at Bella Bella, that there was a passage, not by sea, but from Canada by land. The scouring, bulldozing effects of glaciation are not enough to account for the thousands of West Coast islands that make a longitudinal archipelago with about half lying in Canadian waters and half in Alaska's panhandle. Many of these are what geologists call accretions, fragments split off from tectonic plates in Asia and that drifted across the Pacific to North America over a 150 to 200 million year period. Some islands are due to homegrown tectonic activity, plates impacting underwater but not far west of the coast. The pressure of the plates colliding created wrinkles in Earth's crust, manifesting in mountain-building activity seen in the Cascade and coastal ranges of the mainland and nascent peaks rising from the ocean. Individual islands grew to mountain size over millennia, sometimes becoming part of the mainland when their bases became massive and elevated enough to turn inlets into alpine valleys. Then there's volcanism. The most active West Coast volcanoes are offshore and underwater, west of Bamfield, alexial terrain, with vents nurturing the evolution of new species of marine life, off Nootka Maquina, a mud volcano that evokes images of Mud Woman, a figure in Indigenous creation folklore. Canada's highest potentially active volcano, Mount Garibaldi, above Squamish on Howe Sound, north and east of Vancouver, is an anomaly in the interaction of fire, rock, and ice. While emissions of most land and underwater volcanoes break through Earth's crust and spread to form a mound or cone on land or the ocean floor, Garibaldi emerged in the midst of a long ice age. Its heat thawed a chimney through the ice to the surface, where the material it spewed spread to build a volcano atop the glacier. As the ice melted and receded, one side of the mountain collapsed into the void. Nearby, Mount Meager is similar. Volcanologists monitor it by descending vents in the ice to sample gases nearer ground level. These and other anomalies illustrate a coastal topography that is active and alive, where evolution is ongoing. Should it be any wonder that original peoples of the land, still aware of and living on it, should reflect this in their community life as well as in the vividness of their art? Should it be a surprise that those who live in a variety of villages on fjords along the coast do not speak with one voice, or have their act together, as non-Indigenous put it pejoratively, when it comes to resources and waterways? While our west coast is heavy with accretions from Asia across a shrinking Pacific, and our east coast has add-ons from Africa and Europe across a spreading Atlantic, Canada's mainland Arctic coast is very different. Landing in Quluktuk, Nunavut, the summer of 2017, I was struck by how regular the shoreline was in contrast with our Pacific and Atlantic coasts. You'd think Arctic freeze-up every winter, and ice sheets pressing into and piling up on the shore would have made it more like our other coasts. But the ice here, the annual freeze and thaw of the Arctic Ocean, is sheet ice, lighter, less dense and abrasive than glaciers. At winter's end, solar rays pass through to the rock beneath that reflect it back, warming and melting from the bottom, while melting pools and puddles thaw the ice downward from the surface. Like the ice field a volcanic vent punched through to build Mount Garibaldi atop it, the Pacific coast ice was much thicker, a product of millennia of snowfall that, compacted, became as hard as drill bits that pierce bedrock to reach oil reserves. We equate ice ages with hard, cold, and north latitudes, but they come from massive, ongoing precipitation that need only be slightly below freezing. Pacific moisture provided this. But there is a more fundamental difference. Unlike shrinking and spreading ocean basins further south, the Arctic Ocean and its archipelago are the remnants of the original unified global continent of Pangaea, from which all the other continents derived hundreds of millions of years ago. They contain the oldest exposed rocks on the planet, along with the Canadian Shield around Hudson's Bay, whose 4-billion-year-old rocks and rare earth minerals extend south to the St. Lawrence and Great Lakes as a natural southern boundary, with only a small part around the west end of Lake Superior falling in the United States. Melting ice in the major islands of the archipelago is uncovering preserved remains of Carboniferous tropical forests and massive extinct animal species, a time capsule of an unknown ancient past. The coastlines I've been tracing geologically, more on the third to come, flow together historically in the story of the RCMP schooner St. Roch, the second ship to transit the Northwest Passage and the first to travel it west to east less than 80 years ago. Built in Vancouver in 1929 as a mobile police detachment and supply depot, she spent a decade in the Western Arctic with sled dogs to extend her reach to villages and trading posts during winter freeze-up. A rounded wooden hull enabled her to lift above the forming ice and not be crushed by it. Her skipper was Norwegian-born Sergeant, later Superintendent Henry Larsen. With the outbreak of World War II, Larsen left Vancouver in June of 1940 with orders to sail the Northwest Passage to demonstrate Canadian sovereignty in the face of issues at both ends of the Arctic route. The U.S. highway to its Alaska territory, being built from Dawson Creek, BC to Fairbanks, would enable the base close to Japan, and there were concerns American interests would extend northeast of Alaska into the area Britain explored and ceded to Canada in 1880. Second was fear of Nazi Germany, having invaded Denmark, would use Danish Greenland to build a base for submarine operations in the North Atlantic. The RCMP proposed Larsen set foot in the Danish territory to forestall Nazi plans and place Greenland within the Allied defense perimeter. Fresh into World War II at Pearl Harbor, the U.S. nixed the proposal for a landing, and on emerging from Davis Strait, Larsen sailed south to Halifax. Competing Canadian-U.S. interests in the Arctic go back to this point. Had our southern border-based population supported a more sustained Canadian presence in the Arctic, not limited to token gestures such as the transit of the U.S. oil tanker Manhattan in 1970, we would have a firmer footing for our present sovereignty claims. The St. Roch set out to follow the route Larsen's fellow Norwegian Roald Amundsen had taken in the opposite direction, east to west, hugging the south shore of the Arctic Ocean and Canada's northern mainland coast. Her first winter was spent in Walker Bay on the west of Victoria Island. When pack ice broke in July, she had 2 months clear to reach Joe Haven, where Amundsen had wintered 38 years before. In surveying the Arctic mainland coast, there are two adjacent features we need to look at separately. The archipelago to the north we've already mentioned. It includes some of the largest islands on Earth, very different from the mainland geologically, and from the islands of our west coast that crossed the Pacific over 200 million years ago, piling up on the northwest coast of North America. It is formed not of accretions from across the Arctic Ocean, which is now Russian coast, but the breakup of the original Pangaea, whose other parts are no longer recognizable as they became today's 7 continents. Second, dipping south of and between the headlands of Melville and Ungava peninsulas is the expanse of Hudson's Bay, Canada's ID mark from outer space. Its circumference might be added to our coastline length, but geography and chemistry make it something else. Not a marine bay or inland sea, but a giant estuary of rivers and streams, some enormous, that drain the steppes of the Canadian Shield and as far south as the Minnesota and North Dakota headwaters of the Red River in the U.S. This freshwater inflow keeps the salinity level of Hudson Bay below that of real seas and oceans and reflects in the earlier freeze-up of the bay, the scouring effect of the ice sheet on the hard rock shoreline, and the chilling effect of winds that blow southward off the bay into Ontario, Manitoba, and the American Midwest. Having avoided Hudson Bay and passing up the proposed Greenland stop after the second winter of our Northwest Passage east, the St. Roch exited Davis Strait for Halifax. She passed Labrador, still part of the Shield, but the island of Newfoundland and Canada's east coast to the south is formed from parts of the European and African plates that collided to produce the Appalachian Mountains. These pieces are less numerous than the Trans-Pacific Islands of the west coast, but individually, Newfoundland and Nova Scotia are larger than their BC counterparts of Haida Gwaii and Vancouver Island. The St. Roch reached Halifax in August 1942. There she was refitted with a larger engine that enabled her to make the return trip to Vancouver in a single season the next year with a more northerly route through Lancaster Sound. She now was the first ship to have transited the Northwest Passage in both directions. From 1944 to 48, she again patrolled Western Arctic waters. In 1950, after a third Arctic transit to Halifax, she returned to Vancouver via the Panama Canal, becoming the first vessel to circumnavigate North America. She's now preserved under cover at the Vancouver Maritime Museum on Kitsilano Beach, near Spanish Banks where Quadra and his ships anchored, and around Point Grey is English Bay, the British anchorage. Some may wonder why I've treated our Pacific, Arctic, and Atlantic coasts as boundaries in the same way as our southern land boundary with the United States. There are 3 good reasons. First, the circumnavigation of our half-continent by the St. Roch, touching on boundaries with Alaska and Greenland, shows the origins of sovereignty issues we face at present. We need to be aware of these. Second, our trusteeship of the world's longest coastline, most islands with irregularities in ecosystems, requires we pay as much attention to semi-permeable boundaries as to land borders. Being a water-surrounded country with a broad expanse makes global connections as important as our internal ones. Third, our country's geography has made us diverse long before contact, and difficult to govern, as some politicians put it. Understanding our physical and subtle boundaries can make us understanding and respectful of each other as we meet the challenges we face within and from beyond our borders. In the next episode, we'll look at how our landforms and bodies of water shape the spirit of who we are, what we can bring to each other in a live and let live Canadian context, and how we can share a continent with a power with a differing tradition, and bring awareness to face the forces that harden boundaries at human expense. For Canada's Challenge, I'm David Watts.
In the year of 1940, on the 21st of June, the St. Roch left Vancouver on the tide of Annone to sail the Northwest Passage from the west coast to the east, to prove to all the world Canada ruled these seas. Through the Northwest Passage with Larson at the wheel, the ugly duckling picked away with a rounded hull and keel.